The crash of 50 champagne glasses echoing across the country club lobby didn't stop my mother-in-law. Barbara stood over the shattered crystal, her heel inches from my bleeding knee, and leaned in close. "You are a cheap mistake my son is too kind to erase," she whispered. My husband Cameron stepped forward from the crowd. He didn't check my knee. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into the bone. "Don't make a scene," he muttered. "Just clean it up." They expected me to cry. They expected me to shrink, the way I had for years to keep the peace. But I didn't reach for a napkin. I reached into my purse. Because keeping the peace was over. It was time to start keeping records. That morning, I had sat at our kitchen table, organizing a stack of faded bank transfer receipts. For 5 years, I took every extra night shift available at the county courthouse. I filed civil dockets until my eyes burned, pouring $65,000 of my own wages into the mortgage of our home. I thought I was building a secure foundation for my marriage. Instead, Barbara used those shifts against me, telling anyone who would listen that Savannah was a cold, barren workaholic who refused to take care of her husband. My exhaustion wasn't a contribution to them. It was a utility they extracted while despising the source. It started 4 hours earlier, with a forced invitation. The Oakwood Country Club was hosting its annual high tea induction ceremony, and Barbara was poised to become an honorary board member. Attendance was not optional. Cameron had stood in the doorway of our bedroom, adjusting his tie while I stared at the mortgage receipts on the dresser. "Just wear the navy dress," he had said, looking past me at the mirror. "Mom needs the family optics to be flawless today. The club president is personally sponsoring her. Don't ruin this." I put the receipts in my drawer and put on the navy dress. I played the part. For 2 hours at the club, I sat at table 4, sipping tepid Earl Grey and nodding politely. The room smelled of expensive perfume and polished brass. The club president, a tall woman with silver hair and an impeccable reputation, was making her rounds. Barbara was glowing, introducing Cameron to the local elite as her successful son. She introduced me as Cameron's clerk wife, a title she delivered with the exact cadence of a quiet apology. I didn't argue. I didn't react when she accidentally knocked my purse off the chair, spilling my pens onto the floor. I simply retrieved them and excused myself to get a glass of water from the refreshment tower. That was when Barbara followed me. She didn't like that I had walked away while she was holding court. She stepped directly into my path, cutting me off from the rest of the room. I stepped right. She mirrored me. "Excuse me, Barbara," I said. She didn't answer. She just drove her shoulder hard into mine. The momentum threw me backward. My heel caught on the marble floor. I collided with the tiered glass tower, and the entire structure came down in a cascading roar of shattering crystal and iced water. Silence blanketed the lobby. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The club president turned around, her champagne flute suspended in midair. Then came Barbara's whisper. Cameron's grip on my wrist tightened. "Savannah," I said, "clean it up." I looked down at the blood welling on my knee, soaking into the navy fabric. Then I looked at the 50 faces staring at us in horror. I pulled my arm out of Cameron's grip. My hand was perfectly steady. I unlocked my phone screen. I didn't open the camera. I didn't text a friend. I tapped 3 digits and pressed the green button. "Jobai Ishur. What is your emergency?" the dispatcher answered. "I need police and medical at the Oakwood Country Club," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby. "I have just been assaulted." Red and blue lights strobed against the white columns of the Oakwood Country Club. It was an ugly, frantic contrast to the manicured lawns. The club members hated it. Dozens of them clustered behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, their evening gowns and tailored suits pressed against the glass. They watched in absolute silence as 2 paramedics wheeled a stretcher onto the pristine valet driveway. I didn't need the stretcher. I sat on the metal bumper of the ambulance while a paramedic named Miller wiped a jagged cut below my knee with antiseptic. The sting was sharp and hot. I kept my leg perfectly still. Officer Davis stood in front of me with a notepad. "Can you walk me through the exact sequence of events again?" "Ma'am." I gave him facts. No adjectives. No hesitation. Barbara approached me at table 4. I excused myself. She followed me to the refreshment tower, stepped directly into my path, and drove her shoulder into my chest. The impact pushed me backward into the display. It was a complete accident. Cameron interrupted. My husband was pacing between the ambulance and the entrance of the club. He ran a hand through his hair, his face pale under the flashing lights. He stepped closer to the officer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Officer." My mother tripped. Her heel caught on the rug. She just lost her balance. It's a private family event. And emotions were a little high. I looked at Cameron. Not once in the 25 minutes since the glass shattered had he looked at my leg. He had not asked the paramedics if I needed stitches. He had not asked if my neck hurt from the whiplash of the fall. He was entirely focused on the shadows of the club members watching us from the lobby. The cut on my knee was superficial. Watching the man I married act as an active PR shield for the woman who assaulted me was the actual injury. It was a completely different kind of violence. I thought about the house we lived in. My $65,000 in overtime pay had kept that mortgage afloat. I spent 5 years of holidays at the courthouse, skipping family dinners and working late into the night, just so Cameron could have enough disposable income to pay this exact country club's initiation fee. He desperately wanted to belong in Barbara's world. I had bought him the ticket. And now, he was using it to buy her a free pass. She didn't trip. "Cameron," I said. My voice carried clearly over the idling ambulance engine. "There is no rug near the refreshment tower. It is solid marble. We both know that." Officer Davis wrote the detail down. "And your relationship to the assailant mother-in-law," I said. Cameron's jaw tightened. "Savannah, stop this right now. You are embarrassing the entire family. The club president is inside. We can handle this internally. Do not file a formal report over a misunderstanding." He reached out to grab my arm. I pulled it back before his fingers made contact. "I am a civil court clerk," I told the officer, ignoring Cameron entirely. "I understand the statutory requirements for a battery charge. I want the physical assault documented. I want her exact words on the record. And I want a case number tonight." Officer Davis nodded. He didn't question my tone. People who work in the court system recognize each other. He knew I wasn't acting out of hysteria. "You're making a massive mistake," Cameron hissed. He leaned down, his voice dropping so the police couldn't hear. "My mother is going to make your life a living hell if you put her name in a police database." "Step back," I said. He blinked. "What? Step back?" "Cameron, you are interfering with a police report." He stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. He took one step back, and then another. For the first time, he looked down and saw the blood soaking through the gauze the paramedic was holding against my shin. He looked away immediately. The paramedic finished taping the bandage. Officer Davis handed me a small white card with a sequence of numbers written in bold blue ink. "Your case number," Davis said. "A detective will process the report by morning." I slipped the card into my purse. Cameron watched it disappear. He knew his mother's flawless reputation had just been officially compromised. He also knew she would demand a reckoning the second the police cruisers drove away. The record was officially open. The text message arrived at 8:15 a.m. Just as I sat down at my desk in the Civil Records Department. "Coffee at the corner diner, let's figure this out." It was from Greg, Cameron's older brother. Greg was the family's designated peacemaker, a junior partner at a mid-sized accounting firm who always wore soft sweaters and spoke in measured tones. He was the one who smoothed over Barbara's insults with a joke and a gentle pat on the arm. I met him 20 minutes later. The diner smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Greg slid into the vinyl booth across from me. Looking exhausted. "Savannah," he said, keeping his voice low. "I heard about last night. I am so sorry. Mom was completely out of line. She assaulted me." "Greg. It's on a police record now." He nodded, rubbing his temples. "I know. And I'm not defending her. But you know how she gets when she's embarrassed. If that police report goes public, the country club will suspend her membership. She'll make Cameron miserable. And Cameron will take it out on you. Just withdraw the report. For the sake of the family." It sounded so reasonable. It was the exact tone of voice he had used for 6 years to keep the peace. "I'll think about it," I said. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill for the coffee I hadn't touched. I didn't think about it. The moment I got back to my desk, I opened the county's public civil docket portal. It was the same system any citizen could access if they knew how to search. Greg's sudden, desperate need to protect Cameron felt wrong. I typed Gregory Vance into the search bar. My screen populated with 24 results. Most were routine property filings. I filtered the search by the last 24 months, specifically looking for guarantor agreements. There it was. A civil suit filed 90 days ago by a private lending firm. The defendant was a shell company Cameron had set up last year for consulting. The guarantor, the person legally responsible if Cameron defaulted, was Greg. The amount was $350,000. Greg wasn't trying to save the family's reputation. He was trying to save himself. If Barbara's assault became a scandal, Cameron's shell company would be scrutinized. The default would trigger, and Greg's own assets would be seized. I printed the guarantor agreement. The paper was warm from the printer. The peacemaker wasn't innocent, he was an accomplice. The rot in Barbara's family didn't just start with her. It infected every single one of them. By Tuesday morning, Barbara's narrative was already circulating through the Oakwood Country Club. My friend Morgan sent me a screenshot of a private group chat. Barbara was telling everyone I had suffered a sudden mental breakdown, that the glass tower incident was a hysterical cry for help, and that Cameron was valiantly trying to get me psychiatric care. It was a calculated smear campaign designed to discredit the police report before it ever reached a detective's desk. I opened my phone settings and blocked every number associated with my husband's family. 30 minutes later, an unknown local number called. I answered. "You ungrateful little bitch." Barbara spat. "If you think a piece of paper from a rent-a-cop is going to," I tapped the red button. I didn't say a single word. I blocked that number too. At noon, I packed 2 suitcases. I left the pristine house with the mortgage I had paid for and drove to the Pine Ridge Motel on the edge of the county line. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon pine cleaner. I handed the front desk clerk my joint credit card to cover a 3-night stay. He swiped it twice. "Declined," he said, pushing the plastic back across the scratched counter. I checked my banking app on my phone. Access denied. Cameron had unilaterally frozen our joint accounts. He was trying to starve me out, hoping I would come crawling back to the house out of financial desperation. It was also a convenient excuse for him to lock down the remaining funds. Considering his brother Greg was currently carrying a $350,000 secret liability for his shell company, the financial walls were closing in on Cameron, and he was trying to trap me inside with him. I opened my wallet and pulled out 3 crisp $50 bills. It was my emergency cash reserve. I slid them across the counter. "Room 22, the clerk said, handing me a brass key. The room was small. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner, and the mattress sagged heavily in the middle. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the hum of the broken ice machine outside the window. It was perfect. Living in a cheap, crumbling room was infinitely better than being trapped in a luxurious house where you had to constantly shrink yourself just to survive. That was my victory for the day. The price was that I only had $45 left to my name. I needed to file for divorce before Cameron could manipulate the narrative any further. The next morning, I walked into the downtown office of Sterling and Associates. The attorney Marcus Sterling was the most ruthless civil litigator in the county. If anyone could cut through Barbara's influence and Cameron's financial lockdown, it was him. I sat in his leather guest chair. Marcus typed my name and Cameron's name into his database. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he took off his glasses and set them on his desk. "I cannot represent you, Savannah," he said. "Because of my husband. Because of your mother-in-law." Marcus corrected. "Barbara Vance paid a $500 retainer for a 1-hour consultation with me yesterday afternoon. By legally discussing her family's marital assets with me, she created an automatic conflict of interest. I cannot take you on as a client." I sat perfectly still. "She isn't getting divorced." "It doesn't matter," Marcus said gently. "She established attorney-client privilege regarding your estate. And looking at the system notes, she didn't just do it here. She retained initial consultations with 8 other major family law firms in the county yesterday. Barbara was systematically neutralizing my ability to fight back. She was buying up the legal representation to ensure I had no one to stand beside me in a courtroom. She wanted me isolated, broke, and unrepresented." I stood up. I thanked Marcus for his time and walked out into the humid afternoon air. I had no access to my bank, no lawyer, and $45 in my pocket. They thought they had won. They forgot where I worked. The fluorescent lights in the county courthouse basement always hummed at a specific, grating frequency. For 5 years, I had tuned it out. On Wednesday at noon, during my lunch break, it was the only sound keeping me grounded. Since Barbara had effectively purchased every major divorce attorney within a 30-mile radius, I had to be my own advocate. I walked out of the employees section and sat at one of the public access terminals in the main lobby. Anyone could use these computers. You didn't need a security clearance or a clerk badge. You just needed to know exactly what to type. I didn't search for my husband's name. I already knew Cameron was drowning in debt. I searched for Barbara's name, cross-referencing it with the Oakwood Country Club and the Sterling and Associates law firm. The system buffered for 3 seconds. A single PDF icon appeared on the screen. It was a draft civil summons, filed in the preliminary queue just an hour ago. I clicked the document and read the plaintiff line. The Oakwood Country Club, backed by board member Barbara Vance. I scrolled to the allegations. The text was stark and formal. It stated that on the evening of the induction ceremony, I had suffered a hysterical episode, maliciously and intentionally destroying a tiered crystal display. The document claimed I had caused severe emotional distress to the patrons and inflicted $120,000 in property damage. I read the paragraph twice. The push in the lobby hadn't been a sudden loss of temper. Barbara hadn't just bumped into me because she was angry. I walked away. She had deliberately steered me toward the most expensive, fragile structure in the room. She needed a public spectacle. She needed a liability so massive that I would be forced to sign away any claim to our house just to make the lawsuit disappear. It was a calculated, premeditated trap to ensure I left the marriage with absolutely nothing. It made perfect sense. Barbara didn't just want me gone. She needed the narrative to be flawless. In her world, wealth was replaceable, but reputation was not. If her son simply filed for divorce, the country club wives would whisper about what went wrong behind closed doors. They would speculate. But if the daughter-in-law was a certified lunatic who destroyed club property, Barbara became the tragic victim. She was protecting her social currency at the exact expense of my sanity. To women like Barbara, reputation was the only asset that truly mattered. Everything else, including her son's marriage, was just collateral damage. I didn't panic. I felt a cold, deep focus settle in my chest. I hit the print command. I walked away from the public terminal and approached the main records window. An older clerk named Helen was working the register. She had known me for 3 years. She saw the drafted summons in my hand but didn't ask questions. I need a certified copy of this preliminary filing. Helen, I said. It's a public document. Helen replied, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Standard fee applies. I know. I opened my wallet. I had $45 left to my name. I pulled out a $20 bill and slid it under the glass partition. Helen handed me a crisp $5 bill in return. $15. It was a steep price for a piece of paper. But it was the most important purchase of my life. Helen took the printed pages to the heavy iron press at the end of the counter. She aligned the bottom corners of the paper. She pulled the lever down with a solid, metallic thud. When she handed the document back, the pages were bound together, marked with the raised, embossed texture of the county court seal. She took a red ink pad and stamped directly over the embossing. The bright red ink bled slightly into the thick paper, a certified court record. It was no longer just a digital draft or a rumor whispered over tea. It was a legally verified fact. I folded the heavy paper and slid it into my purse. Barbara thought she had backed me into a corner by freezing my bank accounts and buying off the lawyers. She didn't realize she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle her entire life. The trap was set. It just wasn't meant for me. The knock on the door of room 22 came at 8 in the evening. I looked through the scratched peephole. It wasn't Cameron. And it wasn't the police. It was my father-in-law, William. I undid the chain and opened the door. William had always been the quiet shadow in the Vance family. While Barbara screamed and Cameron scrambled to appease her, William usually sat in his leather armchair, nursing a glass of scotch and staying entirely out of the crossfire. For 5 years, I had believed his silence meant he was a decent, passive man trapped in a loud and toxic house. Savannah, he said, offering a sad, grandfatherly smile. May I come in? I didn't step aside. The hum of the broken ice machine filled the space between us. What do you want? William, he sighed. A heavy, practiced sound. I know my wife is difficult. The lawsuit she drafted is ridiculous. And I told her that I want to help you. He reached into his wool coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. There is a cashier's check in here for $10,000. It will get you out of this awful motel. In exchange, I just need you to sign a standard estate severance form. It cleanly removes your name from the family holdings. You walk away. And I will personally make Barbara drop the property damage suit. $10,000 to walk away from a house I had poured $65,000 into. But it wasn't the lowball offer that caught my attention. It was the urgency. William never involved himself in Barbara's messes. He avoided conflict like a religion. I'll have my lawyer review it. I said. You don't have a lawyer. Savannah, he said gently. Barbara made sure of that. Just sign it. Save yourself the pain of a drawn-out fight you cannot afford. Leave it on the table. He set the envelope on the cheap laminate dresser, gave me one last sympathetic look, and walked back out into the humid night. I didn't open the envelope. The next morning, I went to work an hour early. I bypassed the main civil desk and took the freight elevator down to the basement archives. The air down there always smelled of deteriorating cardboard and ozone from the heavy-duty scanners. If William was suddenly desperate for me to sign a severance form, it meant my name was attached to something he urgently needed to detach. I pulled the heavy steel drawer for corporate estate filings from 5 years ago. I flipped through the stiff manila folders until I found the Vance family trust documents, filed exactly 3 weeks after Cameron and I got married. I carried the file to a reading table and turned the pages. I skipped the boilerplate legal text and went straight to the liability appendices. It was a secondary indemnity trust, a ghost trust. The structure was entirely legal and utterly ruthless. William had set up a holding company for Cameron's various consulting ventures, but William and Barbara weren't the guarantors for the overflow debt. I was. Buried in the stack of marriage documents I had signed years ago, papers Cameron told me were just routine, tax, Joint filing forms was a clause making me the primary debt sink for the family's speculative investments. If Cameron's shell company defaulted on the $350,000 Greg was backing, the creditors wouldn't just go after Greg's accounting firm. They would drain my bank accounts first. They would seize the house I paid for. William hadn't stayed quiet all these years because he was a good man trying to keep the peace. He stayed quiet because he had engineered me to be the financial meat shield for his son's failures. Barbara's lawsuit was a loud, ugly distraction. William's severance form was the actual trap. If I signed it, I forfeited my claim to the marital assets but retained the ghost trust liabilities. I would be bankrupt by Monday. And the Vance family would walk away clean. I looked at the signature on the bottom of the trust deed. William Vance, executing director. The only ally I thought I had in that family was the architect of my ruin. I walked over to the basement copier. I printed a high-resolution duplicate of the trust deed and stamped it with the county seal. I added it to my briefcase. Right next to the certified civil summons and the police report. The pile of paper was getting thick. It was almost heavy enough to bring a country club down. The lobby of the Pine Ridge Motel smelled faintly of chlorine from an empty pool and burnt coffee. I sat in a cracked vinyl chair near the vending machines, waiting. They didn't bother going to the front desk. Barbara pushed through the glass double doors at 4 in the afternoon. She was wearing a tailored beige trench coat, stepping over a stain on the carpet as if it were a biohazard. Cameron followed a step behind her. He held a thin black leather folder. They spotted me by the vending machines and walked over. Neither of them offered a greeting. Barbara did not sit down. She stood, inspecting the peeling wallpaper, projecting the absolute certainty of a woman who held every winning card in the deck. Cameron sat in the chair across from me. He unzipped the leather folder and withdrew a stack of stapled papers. He slid them across the low laminate table. "It is a standard dissolution of marriage," Cameron said. His voice was clipped, businesslike. He was playing the role of a magnanimous executive finalizing a corporate merger. "We are offering a clean break. Savannah. You waive any claim to the house equity. You waive spousal support. You walk away with your personal bank accounts. And we take care of the rest." I looked at the paperwork. It was the exact same trap William had tried to spring on me the night before with his severance form, just packaged under a different legal title. If I signed this $0 divorce settlement, I surrendered the house I had paid for over 5 years. But because the ghost trust was a separate corporate liability, I would still be legally tethered to Cameron's $350,000 debt. They wanted to strip my assets and leave me holding the anchor. "I put $65,000 into that house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And you destroyed $120,000 of country club property," Barbara interrupted. She finally looked at me. Her smile was sharp and thin. "That is the alternative, Savannah. If you do not sign that agreement today, the Oakwood Country Club will formally file the civil suit against you tomorrow morning. I have already drafted the paperwork with their legal team." She paused to let the threats settle in the stale air. "You are a clerk in the county courthouse," Barbara continued, her tone dropping into a mockingly sympathetic whisper. "Your entire career depends on a clean background and public trust. A massive civil judgment for malicious destruction of property will flag your employment file. You won't just lose the house. You will lose your pension. You will lose your job. You will have absolutely nothing." Cameron leaned forward, tapping the divorce settlement with his index finger. "Just sign it. Take the clean exit. Don't force Mom to ruin you." This was the moment they expected me to break. They had cut off my money. They had conflicted out the lawyers. They had presented a perfectly constructed legal trap backed by a devastating social threat. In their minds, they had cornered an exhausted, penniless clerk. I knew about the ghost trust. I knew about the drafted summons. I already had the certified court record stamped in red ink sitting in my purse upstairs. But I didn't say a single word about any of it. Arguing would only show them my hand. A cornered animal fights. A person holding a royal flush just nods. I picked up the divorce settlement. I did not reach for a pen. I folded the thick stack of papers in half, creasing the edge slowly, and set it on my lap. I need time to review this, I said. Barbara let out a short, triumphant laugh. She looked at Cameron, confirming her total victory, then looked back at me. You have until tomorrow night, Barbara said, adjusting the collar of her trench coat. I am being inducted as a board member at the country club gala. Bring the signed papers to the valet stand by 7. If they aren't there, the lawsuit gets filed at 8 the next morning. She turned and walked out the glass doors. Cameron gave me one last pitying look and followed her. I sat in the vinyl chair, listening to the hum of the vending machine. I didn't need until tomorrow night to think. I just needed tomorrow night to arrive. At exactly 7:45 on Friday evening, I parked my 10-year-old sedan between a row of imported luxury SUVs at the Oakwood Country Club. I did not bring the $0 divorce settlement. I brought the contents of my courthouse briefcase. The grand ballroom was already full. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the clinking of crystal and the hum of 70 people discussing their weekend homes. I walked through the double doors wearing the same gray blazer and sensible flats I wore to the filing basement. The hostess tried to step in my way. I bypassed her without breaking my stride. Barbara sat at the center of the VIP table, flanked by Cameron on her right and the club president on her left. The table was draped in white linen and covered in silver centerpieces. Barbara wore a custom emerald gown. She was smiling, radiating the absolute confidence of a woman who believed she had just starved her daughter-in-law into total submission. The club president, a formidable woman named Eleanor, held a small navy velvet box. Inside rested the gold honorary board member pin. I reached the edge of their table just as Eleanor began to open the box. Cameron saw me first. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked ill. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Savannah," Cameron hissed, his eyes darting to the dozens of guests seated at the adjacent tables. "What are you doing? We agreed you would leave the papers at the valet." I ignored him. I unclasped my leather briefcase and pulled out the heavy stack of documents. I dropped them squarely in the center of the table. The thick paper landed with a solid thud, right between Barbara's champagne flute and the velvet box. The red ink of the county court's raised seal practically glowed against the white tablecloth. Barbara's smile froze. She leaned back, maintaining her posture, and let out a practiced, highly audible sigh. "Eleanor, I apologize for this," she said, raising her voice just enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "My daughter-in-law has been struggling with a severe mental episode. Cameron is taking her to a facility tomorrow." Eleanor did not look at Barbara. She was staring at the red stamp. People of extreme wealth recognize government seals. Eleanor reached out and flipped open the heavy cover page. The first document was the 911 police report. The second was the drafted civil summons Barbara had tried to file against me. The third was the ghost trust deed. "This is a certified county record," Eleanor said. Her voice was flat. She flipped to the second page. "And this is an assault report. It lists my lobby as the crime scene. It lists my name as a direct witness. It is a complete fabrication," Barbara said smoothly, though the edges of her voice were tightening. "She forged it. She works in the records room. Eleanor. She prints things all day." Eleanor turned to the final page of the civil summons. "This has the authentic watermark of Sterling and Associates," Eleanor said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "And the filing stamp is from this afternoon. She didn't just threaten you, she officially submitted it." The string quartet finished their song. Nobody clapped. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Barbara shifted in her seat. She reached her right hand out toward the velvet box on the table, trying to physically reclaim the narrative. "Eleanor, if we could just step into the private dining room," I can explain the financial stress Cameron has been under. Eleanor pulled the velvet box back an inch. She snapped it shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Barbara's hand stopped in midair. Her fingers hung over the white tablecloth. Trembling. You brought the police to my club, Eleanor said softly. She wasn't angry. She was disgusted. You tried to file a fraudulent lawsuit using our corporate name to extort a court employee. And you did it while sitting at my table. Barbara lowered her hand. She looked to her right. Cameron was staring at his plate. Absolutely paralyzed. She looked toward the adjacent tables. Dozens of women in evening gowns suddenly found their salads fascinating. Not a single person met her eye. Barbara shifted her weight to stand up. And her designer clutch slipped from her lap. It hit the marble floor with a heavy, hollow thud. Nobody bent down to pick it up. Eleanor looked at the hostess standing near the entrance. Revoke Mrs. Vance's guest pass. Have security escort her to the valet. I looked at Barbara. She was staring at her purse on the floor. Her breathing shallow and fast. She had built her entire life around the illusion of superiority. And a single stack of paper had dismantled it in 90 seconds. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I picked up my empty briefcase, turned my back on the VIP table, and walked out of the ballroom. I reached my 10-year-old sedan at the far edge of the valet lot. The night air was heavy and humid. I leaned against the driver's side door, resting my hand on the cool metal of the roof. 3 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the club swung open violently. Barbara marched out. The emerald gown looked ridiculous under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage. Cameron trailed behind her, clutching his phone. His brother Greg and their father William followed close behind. They had all come to celebrate Barbara's crowning achievement. Now they were just 4 people standing on cracked asphalt. Call Marcus Sterling. Barbara snapped, turning on Cameron. Get him on the phone right now. I want an injunction against her. Cameron didn't look up from his screen. Sterling won't take my call. And the bank is calling me. Greg pulled his own phone from his suit pocket. The screen illuminated his pale face. My business account's just locked, Greg said. His voice was entirely devoid of his usual peacemaker warmth. The automated alert says a secondary liability trigger was activated. I had filed the ghost trust nullification at the courthouse at 4:45 that afternoon. It was a public record now. Corporate creditors use automated software to monitor county databases for sudden shifts in liability. The system had found Cameron's debt exposure, recognized that his financial meat shield was gone, and aggressively corrected the error. Barbara pointed a trembling finger at me across the parking lot. You fix this. Savannah. You call whoever you need to call and you fix this right now. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Greg turned on his mother. She can't fix it. Mom, because she isn't the problem. Barbara flinched. Greg had never raised his voice at her in his life. Savannah was the meat shield. Greg yelled, the sound echoing off the concrete pillars. William set up that trust to make her take the fall for Cameron's $350,000 debt. She was the only thing standing between my accounting firm and total bankruptcy. William stepped forward, raising his hands. Keep your voices down. Greg, people are watching. Let them watch, Greg shouted. He shoved his father's hands away. You promised me my guarantee was perfectly safe. You said Savannah would absorb the hit if Cameron's shell company defaulted. You used her as a blind spot. And Mom just forced her to blow the whole thing wide open. Cameron finally looked up from his frozen bank app. He didn't defend his mother. He didn't defend his father. He looked at Barbara with pure, unfiltered resentment. Greg is right. We spent 5 years using Savannah to hide the money. She paid the mortgage so I could pretend we were solvent. We used her to keep the creditors off our backs. And you couldn't just leave her alone. You had to make a scene at the club. There it was. The absolute truth. Spoken loudly in a country club parking lot. They hadn't kept me around because they loved me. And they hadn't mistreated me because I was fundamentally flawed. I was just a financial utility, a dumping ground for their failures. And the moment I refused to play the role, their entire empire collapsed inward. Barbara looked at her two sons. The boys she had raised to view everyone else as disposable were currently disposing of her. She had no authority left. William stared at the asphalt. He was no longer the quiet, dignified patriarch. He was just an old man facing a massive federal financial subpoena. The creditors wouldn't just take Cameron's shell company. They were going to liquidate Greg's accounting firm. And they were going to seize William's retirement accounts to cover the fraudulent trust. The peacemaker and the silent enabler were finally paying the exact price of their complicity. I opened my car door. The dome light flickered on. Cameron took a step toward me. "Savannah. Wait. We can figure out the paperwork." I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, cutting off the sound of his voice. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered once, then caught with a steady, reliable hum. I put the car in drive. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the lot. I didn't need to see what a collapsing house of cards looked like. I had a life to build. The divorce was finalized 22 days later. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a brick building, exactly 2 miles away from the country club. My phone vibrated on the laminate kitchen counter. I had 5 new voicemails. They were all from Cameron. The transcriptions previewed on my lock screen. He was asking how to file a motion for an extension. The federal subpoena had completely frozen his shell company, and the creditors were now liquidating Greg's accounting firm to cover the $350,000 default. William's retirement accounts were tied up in a fraud investigation regarding the Ghost Trust. Cameron wanted my help navigating the court system he had previously threatened to use against me. I didn't listen to the audio. I highlighted the message thread and pressed delete. My friend Morgan had come over to help me unpack. Together, we carried the last empty cardboard moving boxes downstairs to the alley behind my building. Morgan tossed hers into the green metal dumpster and headed back upstairs. I stayed behind for a moment and reached into the pocket of my gray blazer. My fingers brushed against a small piece of metal. It was the gold honorary board member pin. Barbara had dropped it on the marble floor the night Eleanor expelled her from the ballroom. Right before her designer clutch fell. I had picked it up on my way out. It was surprisingly light. The gold plating was already starting to chip on the back edge. I tossed the pin into the dumpster. It hit the bottom of the empty metal bin with a hollow, insignificant ping. I turned around and walked back toward the lobby doors. I did not look over my shoulder. High society has a lot of unwritten rules, but none of them can overturn a certified court order. I know exactly what you are screaming at your screen right now. You are asking why Savannah stayed for 5 years. Why did she pour $65,000 of her hard-earned overtime into a mortgage just to watch her mother-in-law belittle her in front of a country club? Why didn't she walk away the first time Barbara made a snide comment? It is incredibly easy to judge the timeline of someone else's escape. But staying in a toxic family dynamic isn't about stupidity. It is about the slot machine effect. People like Barbara and Cameron don't abuse you 100% of the time. If they did, you would leave immediately. Instead, they operate on intermittent reinforcement. They throw you tiny breadcrumbs of belonging. A quiet dinner where no one yells. A moment where the patriarch smiles and offers you a cup of coffee. You keep pulling the lever, exhausting your own resources, hoping for the jackpot of real acceptance. But Savannah didn't just walk away. She executed a masterclass in legal self-defense. And she did it using 2 specific strategies you can learn from. First, she established the immediate paper trail. When she was shoved into that glass tower, she didn't argue with Cameron. She didn't try to reason with an unreasonable woman. She picked up her phone and dialed 911 in front of 50 witnesses. She created a third-party, government-verified record of the assault the second it happened, stripping her husband of the ability to gaslight her later. Second, she used the public records pivot. When Barbara froze the bank accounts and bought out every divorce attorney in the county, Savannah didn't panic. She recognized that the legal system has public avenues. She used open civil dockets to uncover the ghost trust and the drafted summons. She bought a certified copy for $15 and used the red ink of a county seal to dismantle an entire empire of fake prestige. Your worth is not determined by a family that uses you as a liability shield. And your reputation cannot be destroyed by people who are actively hiding their own ruin. Have you ever had to build a paper trail to protect yourself from your own family? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe to the channel for more stories about taking your power back.